Okay, hello everyone and welcome to this presentation where we will be talking about Prism 2. My name is Richard Frangenberg. I'm the founder and lead developer at Prism. I'm here with Magnus Møller from the animation studio Tumblehead. He will be showing some examples of using Prism in their productions. And I'm also here with Manuel Köster, currently working at Remedy Entertainment, and he will present a new open source MaterialX editor. So before we really start, just for those of you who don't know Prism yet, I'll give it just a quick overview of what Prism actually is. So to summarize, Prism is a software which manages data in CG projects. So CG projects can be anything from animation shorts, still frames, VFX features, and even game projects. The management of the data happens in many different ways, but the core features would be to create like a folder structure, a naming convention, to automate the data exchange between different applications and different softwares, and also keeping track of versions and data which has been produced during a project. The tasks are automated as much as possible so that artists can focus more on their creative tasks. We try to make everything as easy as possible to set up and also as intuitive to use, so that even artists who are not very technical and even small studios who don't have a pipeline department can use Prism without any problem. To best show you like in which kind of projects Prism has been already used, I'm happy to present you the very first Prism showreel. Right. So we announced Prism at the FMX 2 years ago, and since then we did a lot of work. Currently we have over 20 plugins, some of them which integrate Prism into third-party applications, and some plugins which add new features. Each of these plugins can be enabled or disabled depending on the project of the requirements of the studios. It's also possible to develop custom plugins, so studios can extend features and customize also existing features. Some of these plugins will be open sourced, as well as the core of Prism 2 after the official release. And some of these plugins will require a license, which allows us then to guarantee like a long-term development and good support in the future. So it would be a bit too much to cover all of these plugins in this presentation. So instead, we will focus on these 4 plugins for today. So I give an overview of some updates to the USD workflow. We have a look at the new Unreal Engine plugin. We talk about the project management and how to connect Prism to project management tools. And we also briefly talk about some new Prism Cloud service. So let's start with USD. So in the presentation 2 years ago, I gave an overview of how to exchange USD data with Prism between different applications. And since then, a lot of these tools have been updated. So in Houdini, for example, we created new HDAs in Solaris and updated the existing HDAs. In Maya, we now support also the Multiverse USD plugin, additionally to the Autodesk USD plugin. We have some initial support for USD working in Blender, and we are very excited to see that very recently there's a lot of traction in the USD development in the new Blender versions. And we are also exploring USD inside of Unreal, and we have a look at that later. Additionally to these USD workflows in these DCCs, we are also working on some standalone USD tools. And this is what we take a look at now. So here we have the Prism USD viewport, and we added some first-person controls, additionally to the normal orbit and pen. We have a toolbar to toggle lights, materials, and switch the shading modes. This first-person navigation is very useful when working in bigger sets, especially in interior scenes, like the Animal Logic A-Lab scene here. On the left side here, we can see all the different USD layers which are contributing to this USD stage. In the middle, we have our scene graph, where we can basically see a hierarchy of all our objects in our USD stage. We can also see which of our USD prims have variants or references assigned. And on the right side, we have the viewport. In the next example, we will have a look at how to set up a USD asset from scratch with variants. But before we go there, just want to give a shout out to Polyhaven, which is an amazing library for HDRIs, models, and textures. And during this presentation, we will use some of the assets. There's also the AMD GPU Open library, which is a really good resource for MaterialX files. And because both of these libraries are so awesome, we integrated them directly into Prism. So inside of Prism, we can browse the HDRIs, models, and textures. We can view them and download the ones we like. We can download them in different resolutions, in different file formats, and then use them in our projects. We can access them here in Prism Standalone, but we can also access them directly from inside Houdini, from inside Maya, and from inside other DCCs. OK, now let's start creating a new USD asset. And first, I'm setting up a basic structure here. So normally in the USD asset, you have one root primitive, and underneath, there's one primitive for geometry and one for materials. Next, we will create some variants here. And in USD, variants are stored in so-called variant sets. A variant set would be something like geometry or material. And here in this example, I created an elephant variant and a horse variant under geometry, and wood and stone for materials. In each set, there's one variant currently selected. So right now I have the horse and the wood variant selected. And before we can see anything in the viewport, we need to add some content to this. And we can very easily do that by just drag and drop geometry from our library. So here I drop the elephant geometry and also the horse geometry. And we can do basically the same with materials as well. So we can drag and drop MaterialX files here and just drag the material onto the geometry prims to assign the materials. So here in this case, we have now the horse with the wood material, and we can see it in the viewport. But we can now also select any combination of our variants. For example, the elephant with this stone material. We can make it look a little bit nicer by also drag in an HDRI from our library. And then we can also switch the renderer, for example, in this case, to Arnold. And we get a pretty good view of how our asset would look. This USD asset with all the variants can then be saved out and be used in DCCs like Houdini, Maya, and it allows us to override assets and to show different variations of our asset for specific shots. Okay, let's talk about Unreal. I'm sure all of you saw like the impressive demo projects in the last months and years which were produced in Unreal Engine. So many studios at the moment are excited to integrate Unreal into their workflow. And of course, we were also very excited to work on the Prism plugin for Unreal. And we're happy that Epic thought so too. So they awarded us with a mega grant, which is basically a funding which we could use to hire an additional developer to work on the Unreal plugin. Let's have a quick look at how the Unreal plugin works. So normally in Prism, you would have one project folder, and all the data you create, like if you're exporting geometry caches, if you're rendering out images, that all would be stored in the Prism project. With Unreal, you would have like an additional Unreal project folder. The files in this Unreal project folder will be versioned and managed by version control systems such as Perforce. The new Prism Unreal plugin now allows us to exchange data between these two project folders. For example, we can export geometry like USD, Alembic, FBX, or OBJ from our DCCs and then bring it easily into Unreal. We can also then export data back to our Prism project. For example, if a layout artist makes some nice camera animation in Unreal and wants to export this camera back to the Prism project, so an animator could use it, for example, in Maya for the animations. It's also possible to render out images from the Unreal sequencer and save that into the Prism project. So Prism will take care of all the naming conventions, folder structure, and it can be easily loaded into Nuke for compositing or Resolve for further editing. So let's have a look at an example here. So inside of Unreal, we have the Prism tools available. We can access all our assets, including our libraries, and we can bring in this case, a USD asset of a ship. It comes in completely with all the materials. And we can also import other files, such as HDRIs, and build a pretty nice looking scene very easily. Okay, so bringing in assets is pretty straightforward. So let's have a look at a more complex example. Here in this case, I'm in Houdini, and I have 3 shots, which were produced by Magnus here. And there are some Prism HDAs to view all the shots in sequence, and we can also export all of these shots into separate USD files. Back in Unreal, we can then open the Prism project browser. We can select our shots and bring in our shots into the Unreal sequencer. So Prism takes care of matching the frame ranges, putting all the shots in the right position, and also importing the USD files for our shots. So we can basically play back our animation inside of Unreal, and it comes in with camera, with lights, with materials, and now we can spend a bit of time to make it look even nicer in Unreal. As a next step, we can then render out our images from Unreal. We can do that by selecting which shot we want to render. We can render it either directly inside of Unreal, or we could submit it to a render farm, like Deadline in this case. Like for heavier scenes, that would be a good option. We can then also export changes we made in Unreal. For example, in this case, I want to change the camera, focus a bit on the pics here. And then I want to export this camera so it can be used by other departments in other DCCs. So again, I select the shot which I want to export. I have some export settings. In this case, I'm exporting it as a USD file. And Prism takes care of like where the files will be saved, so we don't have to worry about that. Inside of Houdini, we can then load the exported USD file and put it on top of our shot, so we have the changes we made in Unreal. Okay, let's talk about project management. Very important topic, not everyone's favorite, but yeah, definitely something which should be integrated into every workflow. And in Prism 2, we have a project management plugin which takes care of some basic task assignment, of tracking nodes, feedback nodes, and also setting status of specific versions. This is not really the focus of Prism, so it's much more powerful when connecting it to other tools which are much better at that, like Kitsu, ShotGrid, or FTrack. For Prism 1, there's also a plugin for Aquarium, and the developers are also planning to update that for Prism 2. So the plugins for Kitsu, Shot, Grid, and FTrack work quite similar inside of Prism. But in the next examples, I will be mostly using Kitsu to demonstrate some examples. And Kitsu is a really great tool for those of you who don't know it. It's a project management tool, which is completely open source. And CGWire is very helpful, and they have built up a very great community. And they're also here at the FMX. So if you're looking for a project management tool, definitely talk to them. So here we are in the browser inside of Kitsu. I have an example project with some assets and some shots. And now I want to connect this to Prism so we can actually work on these assets and shots inside of our DCCs. So the setup is really simple. So I have an empty Prism project here, and I can connect it very easily to Kitsu. We just have to enter a URL, some user details, and we are done. Now we can see all the assets. They are automatically synced from Kitsu. We can see the tasks, our shots. It syncs the thumbnails, frame ranges, descriptions, and so on. We can see the tasks here in Prism standalone, but also inside of any DCC, like Houdini here. We can access our tasks. We can set the status of our task. So when we start to work on a task, we can set it, for example, to work in progress, make some changes, save a scene file. And when we are done, we can add a note, give some description, what we've done, and change the status. This all gets synced immediately with Kitsu, so our whole team knows exactly what we've been doing. So inside of Houdini, we can then also see which tasks are assigned to us. We can see the priority of that. We can see the start and end date, and we can jump directly to our work files. So we don't have to leave Houdini just to see like what the feedback was or what we should be working on next. Once we rendered out a shot, we want to review it, and for that we can publish it to Kitsu. So if it's an image sequence, Prism will automatically convert it to a video file, upload it, and of course it's possible to add a note to that. When it's reviewed, it's possible to set a status, to approve it, or to give it a retake. And again, we can always jump directly into Kitsu to see it there. It's also possible to review the media offline, and to do that, here I'm adding our render to a media playlist. So the media playlists are useful when doing daily sessions, or when having like client reviews or specific department review sessions. The media can then be opened in the media player. In this case here, I'm using OpenRV, and we will talk about that for a moment. So OpenRV, for those of you who don't know it, was open sourced recently by Autodesk, and the commercial version, RV, is a really powerful media player and review tool, which has been used since many years by a lot of studios in the industry. So now that it's open source, we thought, of course, it's very great if we would have a Prism plugin to make a very smooth review workflow. So let's have a look at the integration of Prism. Inside of OpenRV, we can select our shots, our assets. We can view all the media versions which we have created and play them back. We can also access the media playlist, which we created earlier. So for example, if we are starting a daily review sessions, we can see all our media versions which we want to review and load them in RV, view them in sequence, or we could also use the RV tools to view them side by side on top of each other, and so on. Of course, when you are reviewing media, it's also important to keep track of notes. And usually you also want to make some attachments, or some annotations. So you want to mark something in the frame, what you want to change eventually. So it's possible to use the RV annotation tools and then use the notes and put the annotation as an attachment. That will be saved with a note, and it will also be immediately pushed to Kitsu, so our whole team knows immediately like what was talked about in the review session. All right, let's talk about cloud. So in the last years, working remotely becomes more and more important, obviously. And in the past, studios used something like Dropbox to share data between remote artists, which worked with Prism quite well, like for very small teams, but it has like a lot of limitations, and for bigger projects, it doesn't scale very well. So we started recently to work on a cloud service which automates a lot of this stuff. And it will be a fully managed service. So even for artists and small studios who don't have a lot of budget or technical knowledge, they can benefit from using the service and sharing their projects and collaborating remotely with artists in other locations. So normally Prism is installed on an artist workstation, and you would access data which is stored on a network storage, which is accessed by the whole team. And with the new Prism Cloud service, there's also a database in the cloud and a cloud storage, and the artists can see which versions are available in the cloud, which are available for download, and download these or also upload their own versions into the cloud to make it available for artists in different locations. Again, this whole cloud infrastructure will be managed by us, so the studio, the users, don't have to know anything about how to set up anything in the cloud. So from the artist perspective, we try to keep it as simple and as intuitive as possible. And so here's like a quick preview of that. So we can see our scene file versions. They have like a small icon to indicate which version is in the cloud, with the blue icon here, or which versions are local, with the green icon here. And then the artist can basically decide like which versions they want to download, or if they want to upload a specific version. We also then will look into how much it makes sense to automatically upload and download specific versions. This is still something we will be looking into. So we are in very early stages of the development of this service, but Magnus here already started to use it in production, so there's definitely some need for that. Yeah. All right, with that, I will hand it over to Magnus.
Thank you. So yeah, I'm Magnus. I'm co-founder of Tumblehead, a studio in Denmark. We've been using Prism since like the early versions of Prism 1. And yeah, it's been a huge help for us. Takes away all the technical stuff, and we can focus more on making films, which is great. So I will give you just like a brief overview of how it can look like in production. And so here you have the project browser, and you can get like the rig assets. So this is basically the asset workflow. When I'm rigging, I spend 99% of the time just fiddling with the controllers and the rest for rigging. But then when you're done, you can very easily export the rig. I just make a template for the project, so all the artists is just actually one click to publish your rig for the animators. And then also one click to publish the USD file for the shading artist, which is great. So for shading, I guess a normal workflow would be to make like one file per asset. But since we're a small team and we decided to use Solaris, which is awesome, just shade all the characters in one file, and you can reuse materials on the fly, and it's super easy. So here you have the Prism import LOP. So you don't have to care about how the USD files is stored, where they are stored, what. I don't even know what a sublayer is, or all of that opinions and that stuff. I don't want to know. I just want to use the awesome Solaris tools and just be creative, right? So Prism in combination with Houdini really solves that. There is so much I could talk about here, but yeah, I also want to highlight the Prism file cache node for Solaris that Richard made. So you can just plot down that HDA, and it magically turns up in this export list. And one button click, you can export all your assets or all your shots, send to deadline, do whatever you want. It's pretty awesome. So that's how our workflow, and it's quite nice when you're shading that you can see all the characters at the same time. So you're not like working one by one, and then you know, oh, the subsurface scattering doesn't quite match across the characters, or the colors don't look that nice together, or whatever. So yeah, that's been a huge help for us. Look at that guy. Potato nose. All right, so next up we have the shot workflow. Yeah. So again, back in Solaris. Again, doing the whole sequence in one file is pretty cool. Prism import node just automatically makes that thumbnail for you, so you can easily see what import is an asset or a shot, whatever. You can add the shot number, it's just there automatically. So yeah, here I have brought in the animation cache with the Prism HDA. And then you just merge over the animation or the shading assets. Now there's a castle in front of the camera, so there, it's gone. So that's so easy to merge different departments. And for the background, in this case, I just, on the side there, just made like a little set and then just plugged it into each shot and added some extra tweaks to the placements, and that's it. Then you have a sequence. And of course, I have to mention the fantastic lighting workflow in Solaris, which is, yeah. So like I did with the set, just made like a sequence lighting setup, just drag and drop it into each shot, and then doing overrides with the light mixer. And from an artist perspective, it's just a joy to work with. Yeah. So the last thing I wanted to show is something I'm really excited about. I've been using ZBrush for, I don't know, 10 plus years. And as you all know, ZBrush is great, but it's not the most pipeline-friendly software out there. So I don't know how Richard did this, but he integrated the Prism project browser and all the export tools inside of ZBrush. Yeah, that's awesome. So now I don't have to care about like file paths or how to store the subtools or whatever. You do it the same way as with all other DCCs that are integrated with Prism. So find the little chicken, just opens. You do your sculpting, whatever, and then you click export, just select the file type. And yes, I want to add it to the USD container for that asset. Prism takes care of all of that stuff. And again, I don't even know what a Prism container is, but or a USD container, but it sounds great. So click OK. And drum roll. You just browse to the asset, select the USD export, latest version, and voila, it's in Solaris. Though without textures, yeah, that's it. You can drag and drop in the textures as well, and it will set up the materials for you in Solaris, which is awesome. And you can even render it. Amazing. So that made my life so much easier. And yeah, I can't wait for Prism 2 to get released. It's really good. That's all for me. I'll head over the mic to Manu, which will show some really cool MaterialX stuff.
Thank you, Magnus. Amazing to see your style and all the animations hooked into Houdini and Prism. So I'll talk about something a bit different, which is QuiltiX, a node-based MaterialX editor. And QuiltiX is still in an early development stage, so some things that you're seeing today in the presentation will definitely change. What does QuiltiX come from, or where does the name come from? Well, a quilt is a multi-textured textile, or a textile composed of multiple layers, basically multiple layers of materials, which is basically what QuiltiX helps you create. What is QuiltiX? QuiltiX is a material node editor based on MaterialX. Quick head over to why MaterialX and why MaterialX is really cool. So MaterialX, next to other things, is like an exchange format for materials. So imagine like 2015, you probably worked in, I don't know, Arnold or RenderMan, and then you created your materials there. And let's say a couple of years down the line, GPU rendering got big, and then you want to switch to Redshift. Well, good luck, you've got to recreate all your materials. But nowadays, or in the future, all of the kind of renderers hopefully have the same format, which is MaterialX. So you can kind of create your material using MaterialX and then exchange it to anywhere. So you can use it in Maya, Houdini, with any renderer. And QuiltiX helps you do that. QuiltiX helps you export and import materials and create them within that application. It's a standalone tool, so you just kind of open it up. It's not within any application. While you can integrate it there, it's a standalone thing. And obviously, it has a live preview of whatever you're doing within the application using USD's Hydra, which is like a renderer backend, which nowadays most renderers use. This is how it looks like. So in the bottom, you have kind of the node graph. You just plug in your nodes, which probably most of you kind of are familiar with. These are just MaterialX nodes. We're doing nothing on top of that. It's just MaterialX. On the right-hand side, you have the properties of the nodes that you currently have selected. In the middle, you have your viewport, which is the Hydra-based render viewport, which we've been talking about. And then on the left-hand side, you just have your USD stage, similar to the things that Richie showed you. Now, why did we create QuiltiX? Well, sometime last year, Richie and me sat down and was like, USD and MaterialX is really cool, but there's some things missing. We were missing something that was artist-friendly and kind of was able to import and export MaterialX. There's still very few tools who can really do this. So we were like, okay, something is missing here. We also wanted to have something that had a direct Hydra integration, so you can do your final look development directly in kind of the application. Obviously, we wanted to kind of be able to exchange materials, and we wanted to have something that is easily integratable into your DCCs, your pipeline, and so on. It should be open source, and that's exactly what QuiltiX is and why we created it. Now, why should you be using QuiltiX? Like mentioned, it easily allows you to create and exchange materials, so you can import stuff, you can export stuff, and you can use whatever renderer you like. So you have Redshift, just plug it in, and you can render with Redshift and have a live preview of it. You can then export it to your Houdini scene, where you do kind of your final layout, or you compose your shots and stuff. We try to make the user experience as good as possible, so we try to strip away all of the technical bits, so Magnus can focus on creating his great animations and doesn't have to worry about what exactly ND in the name is and stuff. And obviously, it's completely free. You can use it, you can modify it if you like, and it has fast startup times. So you don't have to wait your 4 minutes until your production DCC has finally launched and you can do your stuff. Now let's do a quick demo and see it in action. So here, as the first thing, we will create material from scratch here. It's going to be kind of a patchwork type material. And everything that you can see here is just pure MaterialX nodes. Here I'm just browsing through kind of the tab menu, as you are probably familiar with from similar software like Blender or Houdini, where you have similar stuff. The thing that you're currently seeing in the viewport is just Storm, which is a Hydra renderer provided by Pixar that comes basically with USD. And yeah, here we're just hooking in a couple of textures into our material, so it doesn't look just so bland. And yeah, we just plug it into the diffuse and specular roughness, the usual things that you would be doing in production. And now, okay, we are somewhat finished, so let's say, okay, let's take a look at it in Arnold. And there you go, it's already looking quite nice. And yeah, let's just increase the tiling a bit. Some things that you would just usually be doing for kind of tileable textures in your usual workflow. And everything that you see is just MaterialX. So we are not doing anything on top. We're not saving little JSON files or whatever. It's just MaterialX. And there you go. This is our final material. Okay, but next to just being able to create materials, it's also important for us to import and export materials. So this is just a material that we imported from the GPU Open library by AMD. We changed a couple of things. In this case, we just increased the tiling because like it's a very visual thing to do. And then we load it up in Houdini. So we just plug it in and we plop into Karma, and you can see our material. Now, let's focus on a couple of the user-facing features, because that is just an important thing to us, and that was something that was missing when we were starting out with QuiltiX. One of the come on, play. Is it not play? Okay, we might have to quickly restart something. Technical difficulties. Sorry for that one. Yep, the head. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So here, one of the most important aspects for us was that you get kind of live preview. So you drag on a slider and you directly see it in kind of the renderer. And I think that's a really cool thing to do, and lets you iterate a lot more quickly on your materials. So this is like an asset by ALab. And another thing is that obviously you want to work on your geometry, right? So one of the things that we are able to do is just load custom geometry, and then maybe you just want to kind of assign your material to a specific thing, like the sails here. And yeah, with yeah. And yeah, learning new nodes is hard, and kind of the inputs and what is this thing? What can I plug in here? So one of the things that we implemented was kind of that it's really easy and fast to see, okay, what type does this node need or this input need? You can also hover it and get kind of it says what it needs. So it enables you to learn the MaterialX world a little bit faster. And not just like the inputs, just knowing what nodes are there and how you can use them is hard. So we try to make the discoverability of nodes a bit easier. So whenever you kind of drag from an input of a node, and you kind of then press tab, it only shows you the nodes that are available to be plugged in. So kind of you can't put kind of an image node. Oh, you probably actually can, but it just kind of showcases the things that you can do instead of the things that you can't. We also avoid cluttering your tab menu. For example, here we have just a convert node, usual thing that you do, where you're like, okay, I have a float, but now I want to have kind of a color 3 thing out. And imagine like all of the types that you were able to see on the convert node, that we would put them all in the tab menu, and it would be like 15. So we try to kind of put that away and put all of the kind of types into a drop-down of the node itself. That way you end up with a lot less nodes in the tab menu. And then obviously QuiltiX is surrounded by a great ecosystem of USD and MaterialX, so we connect to them. So here we just open up our QuiltiX scene in USD view. And here we just open up in the MaterialX graph view, and also the MaterialX view, just the nice tools provided by the MaterialX. And as last thing, since MaterialX, it's just text, it's nothing special, it's no magic, a little bit maybe. You always have the availability to look at whatever your node graph is currently doing as text. So if something is going wrong, you can always dive in and take a look at stuff. Next to just the user and artist stuff, we also wanted to make sure that the tech stuff is good. We want the studios and everyone pipeline oriented to be able to use this. So we chose our tech stack kind of carefully. Obviously, we are using MaterialX and USD, but we've focused on Python and PySide for kind of the UI and also generally. We're using Node-Graph Qt, which is a really cool Node-Graph library for PySide. Shout out to Johnny Chan, who kind of created this. And yeah. And also, we wanted to really make it extensible. Richie will show you a couple of really, really cool bits in a second. But we want to make it kind of decoupled so you can rip out parts of kind of QuiltiX and put new stuff in. You have your own kind of node graph, put it in. You have your own renderer, throw it in, no worries. And you can kind of configure everything with environment variables and make it as easy on kind of the pipeline stuff as possible. You can bring in your own USD, your own MaterialX, whatever you need. We also wanted to make sure that it's a non-restrictive license. I know especially kind of the larger studios, if they say any kind of license that is not one of the current ones listed and a couple of more, they're like, no, I don't want this, please keep this away from me. So we try to kind of go around that and make it as easy as possible. And yeah, there's still a couple of things to do until the release. We want to focus on a couple of features and make it a bit more not stable, but make it nicer on the backend side. And we're looking to beta test. So if you're an experienced artist or if you're a pipeline-related person in a bigger studio, feel free to contact us. We might not be able to give it out to everyone directly because this is still a part-time thing for us. But yeah, please contact us if you are interested. And then the future outlook after our release, we would like to get more into community stuff. We want to make it available on PyPy, which is basically a Python package thing, don't worry. And we want to collaborate more with the community, you guys. If you have any features or anything that you would like to change or add, we would like to come together and do stuff. And now a quick thanks to all of the things that have been used in this presentation. We used a bunch of kind of assets. Big shout out to Arnold. Thank you for the license. Our stuff looks great in here. So thank you, and thanks to all of the others on the slide. Thank you. I'll hand it off to Richie.
All right. So yeah, this material editor has some very nice potential, especially if integrated into a pipeline. So let's quickly also look at how MaterialX can integrate with Prism. We already saw earlier that we had the MaterialX library, so we could use the MaterialX files and build USD assets with MaterialX. But we can also connect Prism to QuiltiX for some very nice workflows. So here I have an example of a rubber duck in our USD editor. So we can drag some MaterialX file here, in this case a rubber material, assign it to our geometry, and now we want to make some changes to this material. So we can open this MaterialX file directly in QuiltiX from Prism, and now we can make some changes. So we can basically do everything what Manu was just showing before. Here in this example, I just drop down an image node and assign a texture to our rubber duck. Okay, when we open QuiltiX from Prism, it has like some additional features. So here's a Prism menu where you can save the material as a new version. And back in Prism, you can then switch the material layer to the new version. And here we have our asset with the new material. Of course, we can always go back then to the previous version and compare that. Inside of QuiltiX, we also have access to the libraries which we have in Prism. So we can, for example, drag HDRIs directly into the viewport to get a nicer view of what we are actually doing with our materials. We have access to the toolbar in the viewport, switch the renderer to Arnold. And then we can also save out our node graph, our material, into our Prism library. We can make changes then to the material and slowly build up our material library for our project. Of course, we can then also drag the materials back into QuiltiX to open them and create some very nice, smooth material workflows there. All right, so let's have a look at the timeline. So at the moment, Prism 2 is still in a private beta, but we are planning to open up the beta in July this year. So it will be open public for everyone to join. And at the same time, we are also planning to release an open beta version of QuiltiX. Then about 2 months later, probably, we are planning to release Prism 2, the official release. And we are also planning that QuiltiX at that time we'll have a release state. All right, so that's it. Thank you very much for watching.
Are there any questions? Do we have time for questions? Yes, perfect. Yes?
Hi, this is Filippo from AMP Studios. So I've been using Prism since the very beginning of my studios, and it has been like a great tool because it really simplified the entire workflow and everything. And without it, I don't know what we would have done. So thank you, Richard. One thing that became really important to us lately, especially due to the increase of cost of energy, is actually a way to track down the render time per task. And Deadline, for example, has some tools, but they're not really user-friendly. And ShotGrid doesn't have literally a system, aside from the just by the artist having them to put manually inside the data. I was wondering if there is any plan to Prism to actually connect the database, ShotGrid or whatever, with Deadline and track down the cost of energy basically per task, because that comes it's very important for creating bids for the client and also having like statistics over the years of the various projects and also the impact that they had them on the energy or licensing usage, etc.
Yeah, that definitely sounds like a very useful feature. I think if it's possible to query this kind of information from Deadline, then it's definitely possible to create some artist-friendly tools in Prism also, then to give like a nice overview of the costs for that. At the moment, we don't have this specific feature on the roadmap, but yeah, of course, we can talk about that and see, like, have a look at it to just see how much time it would take to integrate something like this. But yeah, that would be definitely something which probably would be useful for many studios.
Thank you.
Yeah?
Question for both QuiltiX and Prism. With the integration of Polyhaven and just with materials and QuiltiX,
Yep.
Is ACES like the base level of importing images, or is there a different option that you have to type to go to the ACES workflow?
We still don't really have a color workflow in QuiltiX. That's something to be done starting now, basically. First of all, we wanted to be able to kind of get all of the MaterialX and USD stuff going on. But obviously, as ACES and OpenImageIO is out there, we really want to plug into that as well into the future.
Yeah, the USD version, which we are shipping then with QuiltiX, it comes with OpenColor.io, so it should have all the ACES features. But yeah, as you said, we definitely need to test that a bit more. Yeah?
I was quite amazed by the USD import into Unreal, like with all the materials and everything being set up. Are you doing like any additional stuff, or is it really just a raw USD import with the MaterialX tree?
This example which I showed with the ship, like that was an example asset downloaded from Polyhaven. Right now, I think there are, like on Polyhaven, they give you like a USD version of the assets to download. Back then, like when we integrated it into Prism, there was only like a GLTF version. So Prism was kind of, after downloading, converting the GLTF version to USD. But for the import into Unreal, that was basically, there was no custom changes made. So Prism was just in the background creating a USD stage actor and setting the file path to the USD asset. You just need to make sure that the UV attribute of the USD asset is correct. For some assets which you download, they have some weird naming for the UV primvar. But for many assets, that works out of the box. All right. If there are no further questions, then thank you again and enjoy the FMX.
Thank you.